will also abide by the Kubernetes code of conduct, which means be nice to each other. If you don't want to be recorded, either drop or cut off your video and audio and just listen in. Those are your options. So this is the December 2nd meeting of the Kubernetes IoT Edge Working Group on the North America time cycle. I'm going to put a link to the agenda notes document in the chat. As usual, members are welcome to put any topic you'd like to discuss there. I looked last night and I didn't see anything queued up, but when that happens, we'll just turn this into free-form birds of a feather discussion. I think, let me take a look. Did anybody, yeah, it looks like there are no links in the agenda now. So I'll just start with a few things.
Quick thing, Steve.
Yeah.
We can only see half of you probably want to adjust your camera.
Okay. I'm kind of stuck because I have my laptop's having a problem where the keyboard died and I had to locate it to use an external keyboard. So you're probably lucky you don't see all my face anyway.
We want to see.
But anyway, just something that happened, was it the week before last, was the virtual KubeCon North America. So we had a session. I didn't look, but I think it's probably not up on YouTube yet. When it is, I'll put a link to it in our own group's channel. But Dayan and I talked about using event-driven architecture at Edge. And we had a demo of doing that where I hooked up a small temperature humidity sensor in my house and went literally halfway around the world to Dayan's installation of Grafana. There were some other interesting sessions there that I attended. I think KubeEdge had one that I missed. Red Hat had a pre-event of their OpenShift Commons, and they had about 3 sessions on Edge. Some of them were fairly centric to the Red Hat stuff, but some were pretty generic. And I thought they were all pretty good. I don't have the links right now, but I'll put them in the agenda notes. Does anybody else have anything they've encountered over the last few weeks or the last month that you found interesting or want to talk about?
Sure, I can start. So for the KubeCon, me and Dan and few folks attended the Edge panel discussion with a bunch of media. There are some good questions asked. I believe the talk was recorded. Feel free to go there and take a look.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. If you have a link to it, you can put in the notes.
Okay. Let me find it on the YouTube. I can share to the team.
Generally, those things, I wasn't there, but I think I did another one. And usually the purpose of those media panels is for the press to write articles about it. And I don't know if you ever noticed whether it ever got published in the form of articles about KubeCon or Edge afterward.
So actually, I've attended 3 or 4 such kind of panel discussion in the past KubeCon conferences. To be honest, I've never seen any article talking about, maybe I missed, but I've been asked questions and then but I've never seen articles talking about it.
Okay, who are the organizations who were asking the questions?
I think it's mainly all the, what you're saying about the media press, I don't remember their names. There are a list of people there.
Yeah. There's some when Alex Williams of the New Stack does it, he usually writes a blog and then puts something out about it on Twitter.
Yes.
So you can, I don't know, I'll see if I can find them. So
yeah, sure.
If I come across it, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Occasionally, if they were impressed with your answer, you can even search for your own name and it'll
Okay. And then the other 2 things I like to share with you guys is recently I saw an article, people are talking about I think someone doing the research, he's suggesting for edge computing like this year or like 2021, it's gonna be the inflection point for edge computing. He's foreseeing some picking up or like a growth of edge computing. I really look forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people have been saying that for years, but maybe it's arguably already here to some extent too. It depends how you measure it, but there's been a lot of these analyst things forecasting that X% of compute moves from a central public cloud to the edge. And here's another thing I forgot. So I've been lurking in Amazon reInvent sessions this
Yes,
week.
I was about to
And
talk. Yeah.
some
Yeah.
of those have been really good. And Amazon just announced an on-prem version of their EKS Kubernetes.
Yes.
And they have a number of other edge related things that I don't think are Kubernetes, but so far what they did was announce these things in Keynote with very vague descriptions so that you don't, until they have a breakout session, and these are like straggling out there over the course of the next 2 weeks, I think. You're not entirely sure what the deep dive details are on these. So they did announce some interesting stuff related to machine monitoring at edge, like for industrial IoT, where they have devices that apparently will collect audio, temperature, and vibration from machinery. And they'll watch it for a while to try to use some sort of machine learning analysis to detect what's normal, and then inform you if their machine learning thing up in the cloud thinks there might be an anomaly detection. And it sounded rather interesting. And what I just told you is the full extent of the details they've announced so far, but it's an interesting concept where my impression would be that Amazon would land some kind of hardware device that talks back to their mothership, to software running in one of the AWS data centers and does this analysis. And it strikes me as an entry by Amazon into this space. Whether it's Kubernetes oriented or not, I don't know. My speculation would be that for that particular one, it probably isn't Kubernetes, just like their Alexa speaker devices aren't running Kubernetes. As an engineer, I kind of doubt that that would require deploying a Kubernetes node out at the edge. What's on the back end, who knows? And they're probably never going to tell you. But they do have an on-prem distribution of Kubernetes that is described to be like the EKS distro they run in their cloud. And they did announce that it's going to be open sourced. And I went and looked, and indeed, on the AWS GitHub, there appears to be the start of a project there. So it looks like Amazon is going into the Kubernetes. They described it as on-prem, but if you will, if you would consider on-prem to be edge, and certainly in many on-prem deployments it is, then you could perhaps look at that as a Amazon Kubernetes edge distribution. Anyway, Cindy, you said you went to some of the reInvent too. What did you find interesting?
I think it's very similar. I was impressed with so many things. I saw they have some, as what you're saying, called the local zone. I bet it's related to like enabling an on-premise Kubernetes cluster. There are a bunch of machine learning related. There are SageMaker pipelines and features. I just had a glance through of the keynote, so I was looking forward to some of the deep dives. Yeah.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that I discovered too that they don't have replays. So if you don't catch these things live, unlike pretty much every online conference I've been to lately, you show up a half hour late because you had a conflict and you missed it. And they don't really seem to be getting that much press coverage either, where a lot of these things that I missed, I went thinking, oh, gee, somebody must have gone there and they'll write an article about it, but I didn't find much.
They actually might be archived.
Recordings, right? Do they have recording?
If they do, I could not find them.
I think they're archived on their Twitch channel. AWS has pretty much embraced Twitch as their.
Oh, I'll have to go look there then.
Yeah, go look at their AWS. They do most of their live stuff outside of the specialized events. They do it all on Twitch. So you might want to take a look there because they're probably simulcasting it on Twitch.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks, Jen.
Did they talk much about? I'm kind of curious. I haven't sat through any of the events that they're doing right now. It's not surprising about kind of what they're doing on the machine learning side in the industrial space. I was kind of curious if they got any more in depth on Sidewalk, because that's kind of really their.
Well, they didn't call it Sidewalk, but I gather it's the same sort of thing where they did just put a teaser that there's some sort of connectivity involved there, but they didn't go into the details. And it isn't like, you know, the Sidewalk, I believe, is oriented towards the Ring devices and things like that, that maybe create a mesh. But they did show teasers of different hardware platforms. So for what they called, I forget what they call, I think they might have called it Retail Edge or something. And they specifically called out a model of it being appropriate for restaurants. And they described hardware that options of either 1 or 2 pizza boxes. So they would provide some sort of an appliance that is capable of temporary severed operation if need be, and connectivity up to cloud. And like Cindy said, they did announce that they're prototyping an effort to go to a selected number of cities with regional clouds, if you will. So Los Angeles is in what sounded like some sort of beta program. And they didn't call this out, but I have to conjecture it's an attempt to remove some of the latency chasm. You know, if you had to go back to Amazon East or West or whatever from wherever, that isn't necessarily going to, it might take longer than parking a data center right in your own city. And there might be resiliency issues where if some part of the internet went out, maybe your hopes are better if it's regionally located, or maybe this is related to a radio frequency mesh that they go to later, so that they really could have, you know, that as either their primary or their backup data communication mechanism, but they didn't call that out.
Yeah, Sidewalk is intriguing. It's I won't get into the weeds on it from a technical standpoint, but what they've done in essence is they're taking all their BLE devices. That includes all your Alexa dots, anything they got out that's got BLE in it, and they've basically been able to lay LoRa on top of it. So the LoRaWAN protocol, which is primarily slow speed, long PHY is kind of the way it usually gets addressed, allows you to transmit data at slow speeds. It's meant for data telemetry. At slow speeds, very long distances. I mean, we're talking about kilometers upon kilometers. And it generally runs on AA batteries, and the sensor will run 5 years using that stuff. So
could they do this using like a Bluetooth chip then? Or
they're using they basically they've taken the protocol, the LoRa protocol itself, I guess, and basically laid it on top of an existing BLE chip, which has limited range, but using the power, because they're building a mesh network. They figure they got millions of devices in close proximity. They're going to be able to basically build an inside LoRaWAN kind of capability inside residences all over the place. And that's got real intriguing capabilities, because we already have very long distance LoRa networks that, like I have one here on my roof that goes, you know, I'm in downtown Long Beach. I cover all of LA County with a single antenna. And that's a long ways. So I can reach all the way above Malibu and all the way down into parts of Orange County with the setup I have running on the roof. And I can send data all day long. What's interesting is that when you start getting inside the house, you can see how this is going to change a lot of stuff when you start talking about smart homes and a few other things. And Amazon plans on using that as a mechanism to gather more data, do more machine learning, and offer up new services to homeowners all over the place. So anyways, it's some of that might be hypothetical, but I think I got a pretty good read of where Amazon's going.
Yeah. Well, they're doing enough R&D spend that they're in a position to revolutionize the world by many measures, as they've all arguably already done over the past 10 years. So yeah, this is worth taking a look. And really what I caught was the keynote where the speaker just throws out 10 different things and doesn't go deep in any of them. So kind of, I think that's the position it's in so far. And unlike a regular physical reInvent, which would have been over with inside a week, they're dragging this out across, I think, a 15-day period or something.
Wow, really?
So,
wow.
And they're really scattered all over the time. So I was kind of shocked on opening night. I registered, and just because I had just filled out my registration, I went online and they gave this teaser saying, make sure you join the first night because there'll be a major announcement. And you're going, oh yeah, I've been to these conferences. It's usually, you know, like a warm beer wrapped in a napkin if you go to the physical one, and a bunch of hype. But yeah, they did. They actually did a major announce, like it was like at 8 p.m. on the night, what you'd think would be the night before the big stuff. And I'm sure for these Edge, the stuff will come out. The other thing, they had those pizza boxes kind of for retail, but then they have another hardware line that is hardened for industrial. And I think I might have seen a tiny little picture of like a cube that looked maybe, I don't know, Nook-like or Raspberry Pi sized or something that they said was environmentally hardened. And that would be more the device that would do data collection or cloud uplink for other use cases. But clearly looks like they plan an entry to the space.
Well, on the Edge, since this is the Edge work group, to get a little bit more back to the Edge, I would watch for, and I think this is going to happen because I think there's some discussions happening with them. Have you guys seen Twilio's announcement with their microvisor?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, Twilio has a big announcement about a microvisor that they built for the Edge. Now, interestingly enough, guess what one of the OSs is that runs in it? FreeRTOS, which is Amazon's. So I think you're going to see some interesting plays going on between Amazon and Twilio in regards to edge level capabilities using FreeRTOS with the microvisor implemented. But you might want to take a look at that.
Yeah, okay. I'll go do a Google search when this is over. And if I find anything interesting, I'll put links in our agenda notes here, even though we did talk, well, we triggered the discussion, but you know, I need to put it somewhere. So
I have some captured links. I can put them in there too.
Okay, sounds great.
The announcement by Twilio about the microvisor. Yeah, I shared in the chat.
Okay.
I have a question. I just today found out about the ETSI multi-access edge computing group, which is basically there to bring a standard for edge computing. Has anybody in here heard of that?
Not me.
Because it sounds a lot like Kubernetes, but like I can't find it anywhere, and I was just wondering if there's like some kind of standardization going on, and Kubernetes is not part of it. Basically.
I know like some company, they are forming a standard for ONAP. This is more about the network edge. So like as the link you're mentioning, it's the multi-edge computing. It's for network like 5G. Because the OpenStack or the network industry, they're adopting the open ONAP, open network. I forgot the exact acronym. So they are forming a standard from that perspective.
Okay. This so more 5G related.
Yes, it's MEC related. It's more about enabling edge network solution. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not even that familiar with this organization, ETSI. I see on their page that it's a European standard organization. So Maybe it's just that I'm too North America centric to have heard of them, but
Yeah, I've just heard that a few of my colleagues all over Germany are like joining on there. So I was like wondering, because they also talk about video analytics, Internet of Things, augmented reality, and stuff like that, which of course are very close edge related. So it didn't hit me on 5G, or that this is a 5G standard, basically.
yeah, and it talks about radio access. So yeah, this sounds like it would be something that you'd find the telcos interested in, certainly.
Yes.
It's too
Yeah,
bad
exactly.
Tina isn't
It's
here
a-
today, because she would probably be my,
It's a gathering place for telco organizations. We've got some people in the Eclipse Edge native community working with ETSI. Specifically, the guys from AD-Link working on Eclipse Fog OS. There was some kind of event where essentially you could go and get your edge platform checked against the ETSI standards and guidelines and that kind of stuff. And so typically in their marketing, they would say that that Fog OS is ETSI whatever compliant. So.
Okay.
Maurice, also to add there, so myself, I'm coming from an academic background, and we kind of work not directly with ETSI, but we follow their standardization. And it's only now they're getting more into the edge computing spectrum, because before there was this kind of a confusion, edge computing versus fog computing, and there was a fog computing consortium. But now there's a slight variation with edge computing. So ETSI is the European standard of trying to make sure that there is some standardization towards that, given those efforts, but mostly for 5G and telcos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
so I didn't mention it, but when I brought up reInvent too, just in case people weren't aware, the registration now that it's online is completely free. That used to be kind of a pricey conference before, and I think it was known to sell out.
Yeah, it was an expensive conference.
But yeah, there's kind of no impediment, and I went through the registration process, and it's pretty easy. It just takes a couple of minutes and you're done.
The other one I like to share is like there's a IEEE Networks Edge Computing Summit coming up. I'll share you guys the link. It's gonna be virtual. You can register. It's free as well. So I was invited for a talk there. So I think with IoT, 5G, AI, everything connected, there will be some, including the teleco, there will be some good information to share and learn.
Are you giving a talk there, or is it still open for submits?
I'm giving a talk there.
Okay, why don't you give us a link to that too?
Yes, I'm preparing my deck. It's not fully done yet.
Yeah, by the way, also the Open Source Summit Japan, I think, is going on right now as we speak, like conflicting with our meeting potentially. And they've always had a lot of edge topics. The specialty of Open Source Summit Japan has always been automotive, just because there are kind of leading car makers there. So of all the Linux Foundation conferences to cover the space, if you've wanted to learn about automotive Linux related things, Open Source Summit Japan is where the good sessions are. I haven't looked at the schedule for that, but I've intended to, and reInvent kind of distracted me from going there. So the other thing, Cindy, I wanted to mention to you is I went, maybe it was 4 weeks ago, but Rancher had an online event, and they had a number of edge sessions that I thought were quite good. And kind of my favorite ones were the Microsoft speakers there. And I'm wondering if you have any clout to maybe recruit them to represent some of those or updates on those topics at our group meeting at some point in the future?
Sure. I think I attended that conference as well. So for the Microsoft one, I believe it's an external company, work with Rancher, but using Azure IoT Edge solution. Yeah. So really, he's not an internal Microsoft employee. That's my impression, but I can definitely double check. Yeah.
Yeah, whoever it was, I really liked the talk. So I thought it was good. And maybe that's recorded too. I'll have to look. And if I can find a link, I'll put that in the agenda notes so other people can find that. But I found it kind of interesting, especially it strikes me that the whole Azure effort on addressing edge and IoT has changed over the years. And that's probably a good thing because the technology has been moving so rapidly that if you design something 2 or 3 years ago and stuck with it, it's probably not the way you do it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember last session, like a few of us were talking about potential topics or inviting people. Mm-hmm. Do we still have the list and then we can like have some follow-up? I can follow up to see in my surroundings who I can invite as well.
Okay. Yeah, I don't, as far as I know, we never did a written list. We just verbally discussed it. So maybe this is a fault of us not keeping good notes, but if there is a list, I'm not aware of it.
So do we want to come up with the list today and then like we can push?
We might as well. Why don't we tentatively, if anybody thinks of it, after today, we'll put in a slot for the next meeting. And then we can just tentatively suggest potential speakers in the agenda notes doc and then go try to recruit them. It's easy enough to delete them later if we can't get a commitment from people or a speaker. The other thing I guess we should address here is the upcoming schedule. At least in North America, the attendance at meetings in the holiday season between, mid-December and New Year's is pretty light because people take time off work and also don't show up for meetings. So whether we want to have the European APAC cycle meeting in 2 weeks, I don't know. I'll leave it to others to decide. I think by the Kubernetes governance standards, what we really should do is put a poll out there in the Slack channel and ask people technically and not have the leaders of the group make the decision, but make it more democratic. But just throwing it out there that maybe there's a possibility we'll call off the meeting in a couple of weeks. If anybody wants to verbally give an opinion on whether they would like to see that meeting or not, go for it now. But and Dion, I see you joined late. I already told them about the session we did at KubeCon and told them we'd send a link out when that gets uploaded to YouTube, which as far as I know hasn't happened yet. I think the CNCF usually waits a few weeks after the conference so that they encourage people to pay the $50 registration to be able to get access when it's more current. But the other thing I mentioned was the OpenShift Commons event. The pre-event to KubeCon had 3 edge-related sessions, and I thought they were all pretty good. And as we're on the subject of speakers, maybe you could even recruit the Red Hat people working on some of those things. One of the things covered was a version of the RHEL OS that was specifically intended for Edge. And then there were kind of a few others, but I thought the speakers were good. And if we could get a follow-up presentation on those subjects by those people, it'd be great.
Yeah. We discussed it before. And I tried, but wasn't too persistent. I'll try again. So, yeah, let's try to do something. I mean, there's a lot going on with the OpenShift and Edge. So there's now a 3-node solution. There's now a remote worker node, and soon there will be a single single node solution from the OpenShift. So, and as you said, there's a RHEL for Edge. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on. Just need to get those people out of the bushes and join the community.
And bringing you up to speed, you missed a little discussion also on the reInvent conference going on now. Seems like Amazon has had some interesting announcements, and we talked a little bit about some changes in the radio communication space.
Cool. Yeah. I read something around Amazon's announcements.
Well, we're sitting here in this birds of a feather mode, and I think I'm kind of talked out for bringing things up. Does anybody else have things they've come across that are interesting or you'd like to talk about?
I just had today like a really interesting conversation with some guys from Siemens, where we thought about like when you run, let's say, production systems on the edge. You have like your controller that's actually connected to the machine. And of course, you can imagine like, okay, this machine doesn't go anywhere, so I can actually hook it up into a Kubernetes cluster and deploy my manufacturing code, whatever is running on there for the PLC or whatever is connected there, to Kubernetes, and I can deploy it with that. Of course, the problem you run into is that suddenly you can change that stuff really fast and really, really easily, which of course is nice to have because you become quite agile. But on the other hand, it raises the question of certification, because you can like have your controller controlling your machine, and then now because we run Kubernetes on there, some other party can like inject some kind of pod on there, take over the control of this hardware, and maybe make some kind of living out of that. Like I provide you with some kind of real-time algorithm that detects anomalies or whatever. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, since it's like sharing the controller or the hardware with the controller, you kind of like influence the system you are like running on. And like, we didn't come up with a solution, of course, but I was wondering if anybody's actually working on that, because like making sure that your software that you build is not like influencing more than it should. If you know.
Yeah. Do you mean this as like a security measure, or just as kind of a bug detection measure, or both? I think pretty clearly, at least in the circles I've been running in, when people are architecting overall control planes for Edge, whether Kubernetes based or not, the security issue has come up as kind of the top priority concern. In other words, if you can't impose governance and consistency on this, it doesn't matter what your performance is. You could come out with any story of how great this is on latency and compute capacity, CPU power, whatever. If you can't impose governance, it's only a matter of time before you have a really bad day. Here in the US anyway, there've been widespread outbreaks of these hijackings and ransomware things that hit hospitals. And once somebody pays off one of those, it just becomes like the gold rush for these black hat hackers. And then within the last week, I saw a story that the first school district went down. So the city of Baltimore in the US apparently is teaching their kids over Zoom, and whammo, the hackers went in there and cryptojacked the school IT system and is demanding a ransomware payoff. When you get into Edge and IoT, even if you manage to sell some solution that just doesn't have totally bulletproof security and governance and detections of things that weren't necessarily even out there the day you ship this, like I say, I think your customer or your user is going to end up having a really bad day, because the things these go into are just going to be naturally things that really somebody doesn't even have to steal the information. If they can just make it inoperable in some way, they're in a position to demand payment to make it go away. And it seems like the world, unfortunately, has gone into a mode where that's what happens.
I'm actually like more talking about the scenario that when let's say I have like this controller system, it moves some kind of thingy like an axis or something like that. And now I put a container right next to it. So we have like really fast communication. And what can happen, of course, is that due to bugs or due to wrong system setup, because not all the systems are like sharing the same hardware, for example, that the pod that is actually doing some kind of analysis influences the hardware itself. And then, of course, security loops and stuff like that doesn't work anymore. And you can run into some kind of situation where, let's say, some kind of end stop is hit, and then your access just follows through and everything breaks or something like that.
Yeah. So in terms of that being an issue of kind of imposing resource governance, so there's a couple things with resource governance that are out there. And this, by the way, isn't new. It's maybe sort of newer to containers, but these kind of things hit in the VM world over 10 years ago. Same kind of thing where you'd have a hypervisor, like my employer's is ESX, but there's others that would run 10 VMs on one piece of hardware. You could have somebody be a noisy neighbor where they sit there and gobble down all the CPU cycles and maybe all the network bandwidth. So they came up with ways to partition that. And really, the trick to virtualization wasn't just to create VMs, but to do it in a way where you could assign quotas. And the moment you get to quotas, I will predict you'll often also soon discover that you want guarantees. So the two go hand in hand, where this governance layer says that, look, this particular VM or container or pod is critical in importance. So I want to give it minimum of one dedicated CPU. I don't even care if it appears to not be using it. I don't want you to hand that capacity over to the other person, because when this critically important app needs it, it needs it now. So we'll set it aside and be willing to tolerate some waste just to guarantee that should this important workload ever needed, it's always guaranteed to be there. And for these others, you put them into this is an implementation detail, but you can assign them kind of priority levels, A, B, C, or D, or numbers from 1 to 10. And kind of when the people at high priority want it, they're VIPs, they get what they want, and everybody, it's trickle down where the lower priority ones suffer the consequences. And there is a way to do this in Kubernetes now. However, none of this is applied by default, and it perhaps isn't as ironclad, and it's going through multiple levels. So really, the Kubernetes YAML lets you make declarations on pods and containers to say that this is what I expect to use. But in my experience, many people get burned. Kind of the easy path is to ignore all these, not even read the docs and know they're out there. And your stuff just works. And it works until you run into a resource constraint. And then you find that it's completely unpredictable, where, there are people who run into this scenario and are puzzled by, gee, it works it works most of the time. And once every 10 days, this mysterious thing happened to me. And they maybe don't even realize that what really went on is that you had a surge in demand for computer network. And sometimes you get lucky. And when you set no priorities, the high priority one still got enough. And then sometimes you're not lucky. And mentally, people have issues can take a long time to figure these things out. But the takeaway is that you should probably always fill out these resource things, but you have to have, it's kind of self-discipline that makes this happen. Then the mechanism is there inside Kubernetes to do it, but much of this is pushed down to the Linux OS itself. So Kubernetes really is just a pass-through, and where they're enforced is inside Linux. And Linux can run on a hypervisor, so you could have yet another layer where the hypervisor has force. Now take this with a grain of salt, because my salary is paid for by a hypervisor vendor, so I might be lying to you, but I think that the hypervisors are thought to have more rigorous enforcement of these resource quotas and limits than what's available right now in the Linux OS, particularly when it comes to very large systems. And this might not apply to typical edge deployments, but when you get to large servers, you will have things like blades or motherboards that have what they call the NUMA architecture, where there's non-uniform latencies going to certain parts of your memory from one CPU core versus from a different one. And it has to do with how those boards or blade systems are architected, where you have memory that's and IO that's attached in close physical proximity to this socket. And because you needed to put in 4 sockets or 200 sockets in a blade, by necessity, those are going over buses that have latencies. And the hypervisor evolved to be aware of those chasms and do its scheduling so that your workloads are kind of matched up and assigned memory that is known to be close to the CPU core you're running on. And I believe that Linux itself doesn't necessarily have that kind of code in it to do those sorts of things. They have options you can turn on, and one of the things you'll frequently find is there's a way to get the Linux schedulers to work in random mode, so that instead of trying to assign you memory close to your core, they always randomly give you memory all over the place. And the advantage is at least it's deterministic. It might suck, but it will always suck. And you won't have these hard to diagnose situations where one day it ran good and the next day it ran poorly and you don't know why. And kind of the Kubernetes flow has to go potentially through all of that. So it becomes very complex.
Yeah, one other aspect that you didn't touch on, honestly, Steve, and I think Kubernetes got it right, is observability. From at least the get-go, and because this is a part and parcel with it, with no visibility. If the control plane, et cetera, stays opaque, you're screwed. I mean, if you don't know really what's going on. So I think from that perspective, Kubernetes done a hell of a job, at least addressing and adopting, Prometheus and everything else, scraping metrics left and right. And in regards to protection, I mean, getting back to the Linux kernel stuff, I mean, you're seeing a big push right now, at least I have, and there's several companies doing it, on implementing eBPF, right, Berkeley Packet Filter, at the kernel level, where you can stop pretty much anything from transpiring, which is pretty powerful in regards to having pods overrun other pods if they're using network mechanisms, et cetera. But that kernel level control and trap is pretty important in maintaining some semblance of control in the long run. But I'm amazed at how, I mean, obviously Kubernetes is an extremely fluid environment. I'm always amazed by the next thing that's, is just around the corner on both the, upstream roadmap as well as third parties and what they're doing. So, I think the observability, if you don't put in observability right away on your cluster, you're doomed anyways, because you need to know what's happening and what nodes are performing well and what ones aren't, what resources are running where, etc. So
I think you're right you're spot on that observability. And one thing I'll point out too is it's my observation that when it comes to observability related to network traffic, that there are differences in your CNI layer if you opt for one CNI versus another.
Yeah, there
are
different.
Some of those implementations that don't really deliver that observability. Some of them use kind of crude networking implementations. Others can use like the packet filter or the open vSwitch and things like that are all other options. And only some of them are capable of mapping back that observability to your Kubernetes objects.
Yeah.
Like you'd actually like to know if you're running short on bandwidth or whatever, who exactly is using it. And I don't want to know that it's this cluster node because I might have 5 things running in the cluster node. I want to know specifically what pod that maps to or what workspace that maps to. And it's my observation that when you look at the 30-some CNIs out there that you can choose from, some of them are better at that kind of mapping of observability back to your actual identifiable workloads than others are.
Yeah, I agree. Completely agree on that one. Because I have also noticed that issue on, depending upon the CNI structure that you pick, you can either see a lot or not anything. So it's definitely worth taking a look at different CNIs.
And then in terms of roadmap, now, once again, this might be kind of too expensive to be deployed in really low resource edge, but there is a movement to support SmartNICs up all the way through into the CNI space. And the concept of one of the things a SmartNIC would have, like if you look at the NVIDIA variants, I think some of them may have come out of the Mellanox purchase they did. They have an ARM processor in there dedicated to the NIC that actually has quite a bit of compute capacity. And they can do things like essentially divide a physical NIC's bandwidth into, I'm maybe too virtualization centric, but the idea is like virtual NICs that can be assigned set asides for bandwidth and can have their own identity for purposes of observability and prioritization. And really when you get up, once again, at edge, maybe this is wishful thinking, but certainly in a big data center where almost they're moving well beyond 10 gig up to 40 and 100, this dividing it up when you have massive bandwidth can make a lot of sense. Whether dividing it up when you're really tiny bandwidth makes sense or not, probably it does, but you also may not have the compute capacity associated with your network hardware to pull this off, but it's something potentially to look at. And even if you have an edge that's end tier, you could maybe somehow utilize these SmartNICs to your advantage at your gateway and higher tiers.
I mean, it could be like your safety line, basically, like the one line to your edge device. It's always working, kind of.
Well, I know back to the virtualization world too, the best practice was always to keep a separate physical network for your management layer. If you really wanted that thing never to go down, the fact is that if you only have one network and something bad happened, you as the administrator might be just SOL and have no means to figure. All you know is it won't talk anymore. You haven't the slightest clue why, and you don't have an ability to fix it.
They learned that a long time ago in the bare metal world.
So yeah, in terms of a lifeline, maybe you even have a couple of those lifelines. But yeah, if Siemens is doing this, is there any project or formal organization wrapped around it, or was it just?
It was just like birds of a feather thingy. We just started talking, and then we kind of ran into this issue. And of course, we weren't really deeply into that.
I think actually, that would make a great subject for a talk at some conference. If you wanted to ever do that with
Put security in your containers, basically.
or even like resource and governance, like solving the noisy neighbor problem, solving really some of the things that solve noisy neighbor are good tools for solving malicious actors too, when you get down to it. So if you're going to bother to do it, you could probably do it in a generic enough way that you can, in order to impose governments, you have to do measurement if you're in observability. And if you've got that in place, you can also use it to do security monitoring, and you'd kind of be crazy not to, right? The information is there, why not use it?
Yeah, another thing is like of course the really hardware power of switch, how you actually implement that. Like normally you have like this lifeline that's connecting all the hardware parts, and then when you press a button, like you can maybe be sure that some kind of thing is triggered that kind of shuts down everything instantly. And then I'm still like not sure how you can like incorporate that into like Kubernetes, because it's not like this one wire that then of course needs to connect everything, and then the pro of your system, like the whole idea of that I don't need to interconnect stuff anymore is kind of gone. But of course, like when you think about it, makes a lot of sense to have like this
like the lifeline to Kubernetes would probably be your portal into the API server.
Yeah, exactly.
And for production things in cloud scenarios, that would normally be put behind a load balancer. And then you'd have 3 nodes that would be on the other side of the load balancer. Well, N nodes and 3 being a common choice. But when you get down to a scenario of deploying Kubernetes out at edge, where the whole, and I'm talking here about a whole cluster at edge, a lot of these things become problematic resource-wise, right? Because even in a big cloud, the load balancer is a single point of failure, unless it's some kind of redundant load balancer. And who is going, there may be some people who are challenged with the cost of even a load balancer, much less a resilient one out at edge, and can't run 3 control plane nodes anyway, in which case did the load balancer even buy you anything for resiliency? I mean, if you just put a load balancer in front of one point, a single point of failure API server, the load balancer just made it worse, not better, arguably. So, you're load balancing with one thing behind it to load balance 2. That doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah.
So
load balancing.
But yeah, that would be an interesting topic. I think I did a really old one at KubeCon China with this guy, Michael Gash, on Kubernetes Resource, but it at this point is years old, and at the speed Kubernetes moves, it's way too stale. And that could certainly be revisited as a topic. And it was really interesting back then. I learned a lot just working with Michael Gash, putting that together.
Yeah, I will probably put in a chapter about that in my PhD thesis. So I could just kind of rip that out and make a presentation out of that. But it's like somewhere next year, probably. So yeah. Because the idea is like what can go wrong if you do it like that,
I think in terms of a talk or an interesting blog on this, writing, even me as a reader, when you write up the war stories of how this can go wrong, it's kind of more interesting to read. For some reason, it's kind of like watching the disaster movie or something, as opposed to the lecture on, these are the commandments and you should always do it this way. You kind of need kind of the story of how horrible this can get if you don't do it right.
Yeah.
So time sync, we're nearing the top of the hour, so almost done. Does anybody have any last minute things they want to throw in there to discuss? Okay, I'll take silence as no. So as usual, even without an agenda, some fascinating things. And I think I've got at least an hour of Google searches to go look up some of the things like the radio things that Jerry brought up. And I'm going to continue to try to watch some of these Amazon reInvents later sessions over the next couple of weeks. But thanks everybody for contributing to this discussion, and we'll see you at the next meeting. I think